Hello, everybody. My name is Bradley Samuels, Director at SITU Research. I'm going to be presenting a summary of new technologies and enforced disappearances. This is a project that my organization, SITU, undertook in collaboration with the UN Working Group on enforced or involuntary disappearances. And it basically provides an overview of different tools and methods that may be useful. It is in no means sort of comprehensive, but it does provide a window into what is available, what is out there, and what might be useful. We're also making available as part of this a kind of spreadsheet or living document that we'll be adding to over time. Let me just begin by making the general statement that evidence comes in all different formats, but increasingly in data-rich and digital formats. So this is just a kind of smattering of examples of the different types of formats that you might encounter. Again, it's not comprehensive, but just sort of emblematic. So it could be testimony, it could be geospatial analysis, point clouds or 3D data, drone footage, photographs, panoramas. These are all sort of part of the mix, and part of this work is sort of synthesizing and looking to establish which tools might be useful for which different types of assets. Let's say we're looking at videos alone. Even within the category of video, we have many different types. So as I mentioned, testimony and panoramas, but also aerial surveillance imagery or video, user-generated content, CCTV footage, or body-worn cameras. These are all kind of subcategories within the overall a video category, and there's many, many others. So this is all to say that this information often comes to us in a variety of formats, and it's often quite messy, right? This is what you might encounter as you begin to pull in information in different videos that might come from different sources, different file formats, different naming convention. It's a very unwieldy and challenging process. And part of what we're hoping to share with you in this presentation is ways to bring some sort of order while still making use of the vast amount of data that's available. And part of providing that order are efforts to codify and standardize best practices. So I'm showing here the Berkeley Protocol. This is something that was put together by the Human Rights Center at Berkeley, specifically looking at best practices around digital open source investigations. And it's the first time that sort of the best practices were codified and documented thoroughly in a single place that we can all kind of resource and access. And is made available. And I think I'm pointing to this not because it's, the kind of necessarily the holy grail of protocols, but because it brings in order and structure to sort of a way of working in terms of at least open source investigations that was, that didn't have a tremendous amount of sort of order previously. And so this for us becomes a kind of touchstone when we're putting together work to establish, standards, let's say, and protocols for how we're assembling evidence. So I just want to make the point that, yes, a lot of this work can be messy, but we look to things like the Berkeley Protocol to help us institute order and structure wherever possible in an environment where the technologies are constantly changing. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about sort of 5 major categories: security, documentation, investigation, geospatial analysis, and artificial intelligence, and talk about tools which generally fall into these different categories. I'll also be running through a series of case studies that seek to apply the tools for applied work that the working group on enforced involuntary disappearances is actually encountered, so we can see how they could be applied in practice. So I ask you just to kind of think about these categories and pay attention to the color coding because it will come up again. So what we've done here is create a kind of investigative tool spreadsheet. And again, I want to emphasize there's no single exhaustive list of tools and technologies that can be used, but like websites like the BBC News, Bellingcat, things like GitHub, each have their own list of resources. So our team has created an investigative tool spreadsheet for the life cycle of investigation that can be added to these many other resources. It features important details about whether the technology is free or paid, what language it's in, and whether it's regionally specific or not, and the categories that can be most likely used for. So these 5 categories, at a glance, you can kind of look at this spreadsheet that we've put together and understand which of those categories different tools might fall in. It's also a living document that we hope to be able to add to in the future. Most of the tools that we're going to show are primarily in English, and that's true for a lot of things available online unless they're regionally specific tools. The work of Localization Lab, however, is an organization that works on translating material and entire tools and software into many different languages. This is an extremely helpful resource to check out. It's not complete or comprehensive. No single spreadsheet or toolkit can be, but it's a great place to start and really something that we recommend checking out. And also, I just want to point out, and specifically Bellingcat's toolkit, they've long been a resource for assembling, whatever is the kind of state of the art at the time. But just recently, they've sort of codified and organized their information and their toolkit into a very accessible resource. So again, we offer this as one of a number of different places where you can go to look at different tools that are accompanied by different information. And Bellingcat stands out as a particularly strong one. I do want to, before I begin, just point out and make a note about vicarious trauma. The nature of this work, especially with enforced disappearances, is very distressing, and the mental health of the researchers involved should be taken seriously. By vicarious trauma, we mean the secondhand exposure to traumatic material, whether that's with victims of traumatic experiences or audiovisual material that depicts or shows distressing content. This guide in particular was put together by Sam Dubberly and Michelle Grant. It's a great resource that details harm mitigation techniques, whether that's simply how to look at extensive volumes of video that are violent, and best practices with teams to make sure that each researcher is well taken care of. This may mean turning off the audio or minimizing the size of something you're looking at, or being very intentional about the space in which you're doing the work. There's also specific advice about for younger researchers, managers, and other kinds of members on the team. So we really encourage you to sort of avail yourself of this research and these documents, and it's sort of continuously surprising to us, and maybe at this point less surprising, that more people aren't aware of how seriously to take continued exposure to this content. So we just wanted to make that point before getting into the various tools. So now let's get into the summaries of the different categories that I've introduced at the top. We're first going to show a snapshot of certain tools, and then we'll look at the case summaries in the next section where we can highlight different tools just to give the widest variety of things that can be used in an investigation. And once again, think about these as suggestions or emblematic, not in any way necessarily the best tool or a comprehensive survey of the tools. So big category first is security. This basically is to ensure that an investigation and the material or the evidence is handled in a secure manner. And so I'll just go through the different categories which are highlighted here, the different tools which are highlighted here. ExpressVPN is a VPN service which offers privacy and security software that encrypts users' web traffic and masks their IP addresses. This protects the identity and the location of researchers if they're looking into particularly sensitive material. Tresorit is a tool that we've used a lot at SITU. This is a cloud storage service with end-to-end encryption. And it just means that, assets that you may want to share that you don't want to ever have online in an unencrypted format, you can use Tresorit for that. And This includes documents, but also could include images or videos. Of course, an even safer way, or sort of the safest way to share data is with a hard drive procured by a company like Apricorn, which is software agnostic. Apricorn manufactures hardware encrypted external hard drives that externally powered with onboard keypad authentication. So it's a hard drive that has its own keypad, and you can encrypt and send physically quite securely. So these are just some ideas on how to set up security for the investigation, and it's a good thing to establish early on. The next category is documentation. This is about maintaining good archive of the evidence that is collected through the investigation, and also the chain of custody. In case the investigation were to go to court, there's a record of who had access to which documents, when, and at what time, etc. So to just move through these different tools, Uwazi is an open source database application. You can track the various pieces of evidence that one has in a particular case. Similar to that is Microsoft Excel. Of course, once we start working with Excel or Google Sheets, these become proprietary tools that are linked to large companies, but they're extremely powerful. The spreadsheet editor can be used as the back end of a simple database management. It's a much lower touch option, and so not everything needs to be a sophisticated tool. A simple, well-maintained Excel spreadsheet is just as valuable as something which is a more complex network analysis, for example. Google Sheets, which allow people to work collaboratively and simultaneously, is another option. Google products are cloud-based and have very strong digital security if you want to use two-factor authentication. However, the thing that one cannot always control is, of course, the human component. If your degree of confidence is high about everyone's ability to follow best practices with the two-factor authentication, then it can be a very efficient option, and you can really make use of the cloud component. If you feel less confident about someone not following through on the best practices, then it's probably best to stay away from it. Lastly, there's a service like Hunchly, which creates a bibliography of researchers' web traffic. It's a web capture tool that automatically collects, documents, and annotates every website visited, creating an audit trail of the research process. So you turn it on at the beginning and, kind of forget about it, do your work, but passively all that information is being collected, and it could be useful later on in the investigation. So in the category of investigation, this category has by far the most number of user-generated tools, and we'll go through only 3 of them here. So Busquemos is a chatbot that helps locating missing persons. It's learning details about their specific case and reporting legal detentions and torture. It's specific to the Mexican context, and I want to emphasize that sometimes these tools are geographically or thematically very specific, and that is the case here. Could be extremely valuable and useful if you're doing work on Mexico. Epios is an OSINT research engine that can be very helpful because it enables you to do reverse phone number lookups and then find associated email addresses or any type of online activity that is connected to either an email or a phone number. And then finally, TinEye is an image search engine and recognition tool that uses computer vision, pattern recognition, neural networks, and machine learning. It's a very useful tool when trying to verify audio-visual material. If the image that you upload has appeared previously on social media or somewhere else, you can see that and then assess the veracity, whatever it is you're indeed looking for. Geospatial analysis. So we'll talk both about 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional geospatial tools here. Maxar is one of the many service providers of satellite imagery that can be really useful. They've got really good breadth, sort of wide range of temporal and spatial resolution. So that means, things that are documented very frequently or more sparsely. And also the spatial resolution could be very low resolution if you don't need a high level of detail, or it could be very high spatial resolution, and there's cost implications for both of those scenarios. Lots of imagery at very high spatial resolution is going to usually be more expensive than low resolution, more episodically taken. Unreal Engine is actually a video game engine originally, but it's very useful to render and load in high or heavy 3D files. If you're dealing with a file set that's at the scale of a village, a town, or a city, we really recommend this. It's been one of the only tools that can handle really large 3D data sets and to do it efficiently and effectively. So it's a really powerful tool. QGIS is a geospatial, it's a mapping tool, it's an open source tool. GIS stands for Geographic Information System. So this means everything from landscape, geography, like contour lines, vegetation information, to census data. Any type of information that can be captured in a geographic boundary, we refer generally as to GIS material. Even images themselves can be georeferenced, meaning they can be placed specifically where they were taken within the Earth's coordinates. And so QGIS, it's a very powerful tool. There's many different ways of using it, but even if you're a new user and you're only using a very small portion of its capacity, it can be very helpful and very effective, and we recommend checking it out. Artificial intelligence. So AI tools and softwares are being developed on a daily basis. It's constantly changing, and so one has to assess what is useful at that moment, and also sort of distinguish between what's the hype and the actual efficacy of different tools. But it's currently being used for things like testimony anonymization, aiding researchers with geolocation, and extracting information from images or documents. Some tools to mention here are Deepware, which detects images or videos that have been manipulated or synthetically generated. GeoSpy is a recent tool that can automatically geolocate images. If you upload an image to the website, it can offer the reasonable degree of accuracy. However, it's not always 100% accurate. In fact, more often than not, it's not 100% accurate, but we anticipate it will continue to get better, and it's something to keep an eye on. Image OCR is an image-to-text AI website that uses OCR to extract text or language from imagery, documents, and from blurry handwritten notes, even with accuracy. So it can convert handwriting into text and use other useful formats. And in many cases, this information is not represented in the most digitally friendly formats. Tools like this can help to expedite the process of making documents useful for researchers. With all of these tools, but especially I would say the AI tools, I think the best way to use them is to kind of use them as a first pass or first step, to sort of flag something that it might determine maybe inauthentic, or to sort of locate something generally in space, or to begin a first pass at generating a text from an image. However, a human analyst, we always recommend going back and checking this material closely. So we have at the moment, the AI has the potential to kind of make our workflows more efficient, but we would never really rely on it as a sort of analytical tool in and of itself. Okay, so those are the big categories. We're now going to talk about how to apply them through some case summaries that the UN's working group has encountered. So the working group on enforced and involuntary disappearances has provided us with some emblematic cases that have been anonymized, but which kind of stand for the types of cases that they're used to seeing. And so we've taken 3 examples and we've broken them down and paired them with specific tools and methods that hopefully will give you a sense of how we would apply this work in practice. So case 1, I'm going to first just read the case, and then we'll go into breaking it down and looking at different tools. So case 1, in January 1978, an active member of the Communist League in Country X, Ms. A, was arrested with 4 other party members in City Q. Prison records from February indicate the group was detained in a nearby military base. A few months later in June, witness Mr. V recalls meeting Ms. A in the military base before a group of people, including Ms. A and Mr. V, were transferred to a smaller military base near a popular tourist destination, City R. The 2 were separated and Ms. A was never seen again. In 1993, Ms. A's father is stopped on a highway by military police who inform him his daughter is okay. That same year, Miss A's sister and mother received phone calls from someone alleging to be Miss A with the message claiming she is okay. There's been no further communication, and Miss A's whereabouts remain unknown. So here we begin by breaking out, that short summary of the case into components, each of which we think may be useful to think about in relation to specific tools or methods. And we're just going to move through those kind of systematically. So starting with the date, January 1978. This is a timing that's pre-internet and pre-social media, so it's very much a historical case looking back in time. So a lot of the material to aid the investigation may exist in the form of physical archives and through catalog, through collecting testimony from witnesses that are available. So note the detail about the member being part of the Communist League. This detail might also allow us to start looking into the specific national archives of the country in question. Both the US and the UK have a historical record of every member of the Communist League, and this is helpful in order to create a list of known associates and network analysis of who this individual was in close contact with up to the period of their disappearances. This may help locate more witnesses. So this is just a kind of starting point and a way to use National Archives for historical cases. So here, there's also a detail about the text, about prison records, about the military base. Given the historical nature of the case, it may involve a researcher going physically to the archives to look at prison records, or if a country has published these documents as part of a truth commission, as has sometimes happened in Argentina and Mexico, the information in question may already be digitally available, in which case some of the other tools, such as the AI tools I mentioned previously, may make searching large volumes of text more efficient and quicker. Then there's a note about a witness recalling seeing the victim. Collecting testimony is a very crucial part of an investigation, obviously, and typically in a historical case, it might have already been by hand or written testimony or verbally given to the interviewer. And so when we think about witness testimony, each testimony must be verified for accuracy and reliability. And while investigators can choose between written or film testimony, there's also tools that provide a secure platform that can be used to video and securely upload this information. So a tool we might use to record testimony would be something like Eyewitness to Atrocities, which securely captures video and embeds it with specific metadata information, meaning the time of capture and the geographic location. Collecting testimony video helps because seeing the expressions and emotions of an individual adds a layer if we're keeping in mind not just the investigation, but the presentation of the material as well. Then the second military base where Ms. A was transferred to was in a popular tourist destination. This detail is crucial because the geographic specificity of any place determines how much material there is available, either online or in a physical archive. So in this case, the geographic location of each case determines, how much evidence we might find online. Larger cities or tourist destinations like this, for instance, will have likely larger volumes of photographic records, as in Flickr and GIS datasets, which can be retrieved by going to relevant national census databases and geological surveys. Much of this material is open source and free to access. Flickr, for example, is an online image website that uses a lot of users upload pictures from different parts of the world. Tourist destinations are a very strong example. The more popular the place, the more likely that it will be to have large volumes of available media than you might have for like a small town or a remote village somewhere. So here we there's a time jump to 1993, which is crucial again, in that it opens up more options for what is useful and available. Large gaps in time between incidents and subsequent evidence can impact which methods should be used or could be used. While it's easier to access recent phone records, it may be difficult to retrieve cases in the 1990s. Better record keeping and advances in technology would likely make retrieving phone records information more likely. The date of the disappearance and the location will provide clues as to the kinds of record keeping that are available and the degree to which the internet can be a helpful resource. Any changes in the timeline, such as this one, the jump to 93, should be noted and considered. Then there's a note about being stopped by military police, and this could be a crucial piece of information. Assuming that the military policeman was in uniform and the father was able to recall a description of the outfit, investigators can narrow down which agencies were involved using online databases like Camopedia, which track various military uniforms and insignia. The phone call that the mother and the sister received is a peculiar detail. The authenticity of this phone call would be very hard to determine from a case in 1993, assuming the call records are not retrievable. Of course, having access to the call record in this case would be ideal and essential for attempting to trace the phone number with a tool like Truecaller. However, the mother would have to provide more detailed testimony on why she did or did not believe the phone call was coming from Ms. A. If a call record is not available, we may instead spend time collecting testimony of the mother and the sister. And we've already talked about eyewitness to atrocities, but this could also be done through an end-to-end encrypted service like Signal, which we use often in our work. Okay, case 2, a more contemporary case. And I'll begin again by reading it and then breaking it down into parts that can be associated with different tools and methods. On May 29th, 2013, at approximately 2 p.m., Mr. A, a business person also politically active, was allegedly last seen in the departures lounge of an international airport while awaiting to travel to a different city within the country. Mr. A had in fact traveled 9 days before on a business trip from his country of residence, country Y, to country X. While staying in country X, he stayed at a rented apartment. Before his disappearance, Mr. A made a telephone call to an individual associated with him. Since then, all attempts to contact him by telephone, text message, and email have been unsuccessful. There are also reports that Mr. A might have been arrested by security agents of country X near the border of his country of origin, country J, different than from his country of residence. Airport records show that Mr. A did not board the flight and his name was not on the corresponding register. A few years later, the family of Mr. A received information that he would have been killed and buried somewhere in his country of origin, country J. This information was somehow confirmed by persons who allegedly participated in the crime and who initially confessed their involvement and subsequently denied it. Based on the information gathered, the place where the remains of Mr. A could be buried in his country of origin has been roughly identified as a residential area nearby a village. Okay, so again, we break down the case into components to evaluate individually. And again, we begin with time. Keeping track of what's happened when becomes crucial, especially when there's an audio-visual material involved, as there is in this case. We need to understand what we can say for certain before or after moments in time, and this can sometimes be difficult if there's a large volume of data to sift through. For example, photos and videos. You know, it's great to have access to lots of assets that might be relevant, but the larger that archive of information becomes, the more time it takes to go through it, and at some point it becomes prohibitively time consuming. So as part of sort of addressing the need to deal with an increasingly large volume of video evidence and photographic evidence, our team at SITU produced a tool called Codec, which is an open source tool, which is really a way to organize, really optimized for video, but can also be photographic assets, both in time and in space. So here you can see the interface on the left. You've got different videos by time on a timeline, and then on the right there is a map, or basically a spatial interface, which shows you where the videos were taken. And while you may have thousands of videos or tens of thousands of videos, ultimately the goal is to kind of almost always narrow it down to a small number of assets. And this tool, this user interface, helps you do that. Moving to the note about Mr. A's political activity. This is crucial for us because it can point to people that he was a possible threat to, and people that might be interested in capturing or disappearing him based on whatever political leanings that may have been. So 2013, again, we're thinking about the time here, represents the dawn of social media. There's likely to be a whole lot of activity on websites like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. One tool that is useful is Intelligence X. It's a search engine that looks through archived material from websites like Facebook. There's also specific tools like Twitter and Instagram, but because the APIs of those websites change quite a lot, those tools can become redundant. The Wayback Machine is an incredibly powerful tool. It's a digital archive of a very comprehensive sort of survey of the internet. So things that aren't necessarily online now, you can go back to the Wayback Machine, and it's a really good place to start looking through to find historic active online activity. The next part of this case, the site of the airport is the last time that the person was seen in the departures lounge. So by 2013, the likelihood is high that there'd be CCTV footage within an airport. So we can expect to have visual documentation of most parts of that facility. And then we begin to look at tools like Blender. So Blender is an open source modeling tool, 3D modeling tool that allows you to take information about buildings and begin to model them, and sometimes look at photographic or video evidence in relation to that model. So here you can see, this is for an entirely different case, but how a photograph is positioned in space to help us understand what it's captured and the surrounding context. So this is where tools like Blender and other 3D modeling software can become really helpful. Now let's move on to the phone call that was made by Mr. A right before he disappeared. If we have access to his call data records, it can be useful to visualize the activity immediately before his disappearance. And so sometimes this is, as straightforward as cooperating with relevant authorities to get call records that can help investigators determine both the suspicious individuals that the victim was interacting with, as well as the specific time of the last known call. And in relation to the last point about the specific time, we can then begin to map the activity of phone calls and cell phone records and really see where there might be a drop-off. So you can see here the activity, there's calls being made, received, and then it just kind of at a certain point drops off and there's no more activity. So that's an important sort of timestamp to take note of. If the report contains information about the specific type of security agents from country X, investigators may find further leads by identifying key leaders and their ties to Mr. A's political activity. The Camopedia tool was useful and was helpful in identifying the faction of the military, but there's also a tool called Who's in Command, which is a website that has information about the organizational structures and key members of different army and security forces. And this is information, this is often very idiosyncratic. It depends entirely on how different defense forces are organized, and this website seeks to consolidate that information and make it available. So, understanding a chain of command, this is a really useful tool. So testimony from alleged perpetrators might entail ensuring their security by changing their voice, blurring or masking their appearance for security and psychosocial concerns. The process of anonymization has previously been exorbitantly time-consuming. However, AI is expediting this process in numerous ways. So this is a place where AI actually, it feels like the technology is actually mature enough to apply and be useful in contemporary investigations. So here you see Veritone. This is a tool that can help anonymize audio and voice. And then tools like Runway and even Adobe After Effects can help sort of identify and redact parts of the body. But importantly, and to do that efficiently, the time-consuming part is to do it frame by frame. But this is where some of these AI tools can make that much more efficient, so that you can produce documents like this, where you might have a video of a survivor providing testimony and his likeness has been completely blurred. However, you're able to maintain something of the gestures and the background and sort of not have these kind of blunt instruments of just sort of full black box redaction. And then the final detail of case 2 is about was where Mr. A could have been buried in a residential area in a village, and this would bring us to looking for satellite imagery, for example. So the temporal resolution and commercial availability of satellite imagery has drastically increased in the last decade. So if you're looking at the last 3 years, for example, you could expect to have satellite imagery almost every day. In 2013, it was, more episodic, but you could expect to get some satellite imagery captured of the site, perhaps at a lower resolution, but clear enough for researchers to know any large changes like dug up earth, cleared trees, etc. Planet is a private sector company. Copernicus is free to use. And so the Copernicus data space ecosystem is an open ecosystem that provides free instances of access to a wide range of data and services from the European Space Agency's Copernicus Sentinel missions, which I believe are about 10-meter resolution. And Planet is the leading geo platform with the highest frequency satellite data available to purchase. So you're going to be looking for, the date of interest, location of interest, and it will give you a sense of, the different satellite products that are available to you. And again, the more images you need, the higher temporal resolution, and the higher spatial resolution, the more expensive it can become. But sometimes you can use just European Space Agency satellites or US Space Agency satellites that are free, and depending on what you're looking for, that can be perfectly sufficient. And I just want to present an example that we're all probably familiar with, which is Google Earth or Google Earth Pro. Again, it's slightly lower resolution, but you can click through now a timeline of images and go back a decade. This is always, I would say, a good place to start. It often requires you to then move to a different satellite provider to get a higher resolution imagery or more precise imagery in time. But it is extremely useful to get a kind of lay of the land. So case 3 is the final case. In February 2007, Mr. B had traveled to country G for business. On 14th of February 2007, when Mr. B was about to leave his hotel, located on an island in country G, for the airport to fly to country R, his place of residence, he was abducted in the lobby by 4 plainclothes men, believed to be security agents. Mr. B's name figured on the checkout list of the hotel, albeit his name was not found on the flight's manifests for leaving country G, nor was his passport registered in any other country. Around 20 days after Mr. B's disappearance, a state-sanctioned paper of country G reported that he was in the hands of security forces. No details were disclosed on his whereabouts or the reasons for his arrest. 3 years after Mr. B's disappearance, his relatives were made privy of confidential documents, according to which the intelligence agency of country G had ordered his arrest and detention. More than 4 years after Mr. B's disappearance, his relatives also learned about the existence of videos and pictures that would suggest their loved one is in a third country different from his country of residence and the one in which he went missing. The authenticity of these videos and pictures has never been assessed. The fate and whereabouts of Mr. B remain unknown. Okay, so let's go through this one in components and parts. So again, we start with a specific date. The time period in this case sets certain parameters for what types of data are retrievable and usable, or what kind of expectations we should have. 2007 predates the mass adoption of social media. So unless Mr. B was a really active user on Facebook in its early incarnation, it's more likely, if anything, that he would have been using less well-known but active special interest forums and message boards like those created for niche interests. So those are worth looking at. This indicates the location of departure and a potential destination. So this is really important information. Tracing Mr. B's activity before his disappearance, including places he visited and who he was in contact with, can be facilitated rather by tools like Maltego, where researchers can map Mr. B's activity and perform a pattern of life analysis or a network analysis to understand where whether his behaviors and routines changed in any way prior to the disappearance. Just a note of caution about network analysis tools. It's really important to understand what is done with your data and how secure your data is when it's sort of uploaded and used in these tools. we feel good about the use of Maltego, but other network analysis tools can be very problematic in terms of data security. So something to keep in mind. Lobbies, like the airport we discussed in the previous case, are often surveilled spaces, increasing the likelihood of available CCTV footage. So let's say we have CCTV footage and security footage is obtainable. Researchers can look through this to find both the moment of abduction as well as the activity of the perpetrators leading up to the moment of abduction. AI tools like Viso AI can now expedite this process through automated labeling. Viso AI can comb through large volumes of video to look for images of the perpetrators before or after Mr. B's disappearance. And this is really helpful because CCTV footage tends to be, constantly capturing information. And so you end up having to go through, could be tens or hundreds or even thousands of hours of footage. And if there are ways to begin to flag and annotate specific content, this can be very useful. Again, not as a sort of end goal analytical product, but as a way to highlight pieces of video that we might want to spend more time analyzing. Different countries keep records of flight manifests that are accessible in their national archives, though most are not digitized. The availability of these records and accessibility of the archives differ from country to country. So again, as with the chain of command, this will widely vary based on jurisdiction and which country we're talking about. And they have different record-keeping protocols for information like these manifests. So researchers would have to query specific governments or airlines to access this information. But one example, like the National Archives in the US, contains passenger information from vessels arriving from foreign ports dating back as far as 1820. So it's certainly worth the effort to inquire and find what kind of records might be kept. Media reports such as this one can take on essential importance. Newspaper archives are increasingly common. They're both centralized databases, and then there's those that are specific to each newspaper. Various national libraries also maintain robust archives of historical newspapers. This tool, Newspaper Archive, would be a good place for researchers to start looking for this information. We would also, just as in the case of the manifests, national government archives can also maintain records of large newspapers the researchers can access manually. When documents become available, finding the relevant part of the can be the critical challenge if the text is voluminous. So let's say you get something that's thousands of pages. AI tools like DocSumo can aid researchers to determine whether documents have been tampered, as well as to help transcribe documents quickly. Such tools have made the time-intensive task of combing through large documents much easier. So this is another place in which AI automates processes like transcribing information, summarizing content, and even detecting whether material has been tampered with. So this will continue to improve over time, but this is already, if you're looking at large, if you can get the document in a format which can be in a textual format, let's say it's in a visual format, you use an OCR tool, and then you then have it in a textual format, tools like DocSumo and others can be very, very helpful in, finding what you're looking for within a large tome of information. Of course, authentication of photos and video assets is often a crucial component of all of this work. And given that the case is dating back to 2007, we can look to methods of image and video analysis that include looking at files metadata. So if this was a contemporary question, we would be talking about trying to authenticate whether there's been generative AI or other types of training sets that have been applied. In this case, it's 2007, so that's highly unlikely, nearly impossible to be the case. So we use tools like EXIF tool to scrape the information and perform tasks of geolocation and chronolocation. So the metadata is not necessarily authoritative, but it may have information about where and when an image was captured. Additionally, more complex image and video forensics are possible with softwares like Giro, which completely automate the technically complex process of forensic analysis. I want to emphasize that this is a first step. Again, if it's flagging something as inauthentic, it is then important to get it to an expert who could then do a deeper dive on the digital forensics. And part of this is also recognizing, one's own limitations and expertise, and when you should be sort of seeking the help of others in more rarefied and technically challenging questions. This is a brief demonstration just of how XF tool is run. It's using Windows command line interface, the text-based way to interact with the computer's operating system. So very straightforward, easy to use. And that's it for case 3. And hopefully that's provided a useful overview of, some of the big themes, some of the big categories, right, that these tools fall in, and then through the 3 cases, some of the applied ways in which we might use these tools. We want to thank the UN Working Group on enforced and involuntary disappearances. I want to thank my colleague, especially Gauri Bahuganat, for doing a tremendous amount of work, doing the lion's share of the work that you saw here today. And from the working group specifically, I want to call out and thank Gabrielle Citroni and Coat Alier, who provided invaluable feedback and advised on all parts of this work. If you have any questions or would like to reach out to us about any of this, you have our email address here. And we thank you for taking the time to watch this video.